I was 69 the year I sold the house. Not because I wanted to, but because I told myself it was the right thing. The practical thing. And practical things are easier to explain to others than the quiet ache of loneliness. The house had been mine for over 40 years. It sat at the end of a maple-lined street, where seasons knew how to show themselves. I had painted its shutters twice, repaired its garden wall by hand, and buried 2 cats and a husband in its memories. Richard died in the winter, quietly, the way he lived. After that, the house echoed differently. He had been the kind of man who didn't speak often, but when he did, it was with warmth. He taught Matthew how to change a tire, to fix a leaky tap, and to always return a borrowed book. He would sit with me in the kitchen on rainy evenings, folding laundry and humming softly under his breath. Matthew had been close to me once. As a child, he followed me around the garden, asking about every flower and worm. I packed his lunches, sewed buttons onto his school shirts, and sat through piano recitals where his hands trembled. When he moved out, we spoke often. He would call to ask about recipes or to tell me a funny story from work. Even after he married, we shared long phone calls, just the 2 of us. But over the years, those calls shortened. And then stopped. His wife came into our lives quietly, with firm handshakes and a schedule always full. She was efficient, intelligent, never unkind, but rarely tender. I tried, in those early months, to reach her, with little gestures, with shared meals, with old family stories. She smiled politely, always briefly, as if already moving on in her mind. I learned to stop trying. Not out of resentment, but out of weariness. For a while, I kept busy, library volunteering, book club, occasional dinners with women who also wore rings that no longer meant married. But evenings grew longer. Rooms got colder. And the silences, they stopped being restful. There's a loneliness that doesn't announce itself, it just begins to take root, gently, until it becomes the air around you. When my son suggested I move into the new apartment attached to their home, I didn't say yes right away. But I knew I would. He called it a studio, though really it was a small room with a kitchenette and a narrow bath. Built for in-laws, he'd said. Independent, but connected. I remembered the way he looked at me when he said it, hopeful, hurried, and a little uncertain. As though offering me a kindness that might cost more than he could admit. It was meant to sound generous. He and his wife had bought a large modern home outside the city. For bedrooms, a pale stone kitchen, a backyard big enough for a dog they didn't have. My new space was at the far end, with a separate entrance through the side gate. It had its own address. Its own meter. Its own name, in a way, the suite, they called it. His wife had smiled politely during the move. Offered tea I never saw. She was brisk, organized, with a clipped voice and perfect hair. We were never close. Not hostile, but not familiar. I often wondered if she felt, deep down, that I was a weight they were expected to carry. She was kind enough, but her kindness was distant, as though always being performed. I sold my house in spring. Packed my things slowly, box by box. Gave away what no longer belonged to the life ahead, old dishes, the guest bed, the large oak dining table that had once hosted every birthday cake Matthew ever blew out. I kept the books. The linen napkins. Richard's wristwatch. Some objects carry a weight that is more than memory, it's identity. The studio was white, new, and smelled faintly of plaster. There was no noise, just the hum of a compact refrigerator and the occasional footstep from the house beyond the wall. My wall. The border between the life I came from and the one I'd stepped into. I unpacked in silence. The sun filtered through the blinds in narrow strips. I hung one photo, Richard in his garden chair, sleeves rolled, smiling slightly, as if to say, I'm still watching. That night, I made tea. Listened to the muffled rhythm of another household through drywall. Laughter. A closing door. A child's voice. A television somewhere upstairs. I was close. But closeness, I was beginning to understand, had nothing to do with distance. The first days passed in the gentle hum of settling in. I unpacked slowly, not out of reluctance, but because there was nowhere to rush to. Time stretched differently now. It didn't press against me. It simply hovered. The studio remained tidy, too tidy, perhaps. I placed the books along one wall, spines straight as soldiers, the titles familiar as old friends. The armchair from my reading corner in the old house stood near the window, smaller here somehow, though it hadn't changed. It brought a memory with it, Richard asleep in it once, book fallen to his chest, glasses askew, the light from the floor lamp warming his face. The moment was small, but it lived inside me as if it happened yesterday. There were boxes I didn't open. Not yet. One held old letters. Another, my wedding china. I told myself the space wasn't ready for them. But the truth was simpler, some things belonged to rooms that no longer existed. Those objects carried voices, smells, the weight of laughter and grief. I wasn't sure the silence here would know what to do with them. The sounds of the main house came and went, footsteps in the hall, a burst of music, a child's sharp laugh. All of it muffled, framed by walls and insulation. I had imagined something else, I suppose. I had thought proximity would invite participation. That I'd be asked in for coffee. That the child might run in, tugging my hand to show me a drawing, or simply sit in my lap as Matthew once did. But I quickly learned that walls are more than structure. They are boundaries, whether we name them or not. Matthew no longer came by just to check in. He would pass near my door on his way to the garage or the garden, but never stopped. I wondered if he feared I might need something. That a knock might turn into a conversation. And a conversation into a reminder. A reminder that I was still here. I began to notice the small distinctions. My mailbox was separate. My packages were left at the side gate. When groceries arrived, no one asked if I needed anything. Not out of malice, just absence. I wasn't part of their rhythms. His wife once left a tray outside my door, soup, bread, a cloth napkin folded precisely. No note. No knock. It felt like kindness delivered with gloves on. I ate it all. And washed the tray, and returned it silently to where I'd found it. That was our rhythm. Silent transactions. One morning, I found a handwritten note from the delivery man tucked between my door and the frame. No answer. Left parcel with neighbor. It hadn't occurred to anyone in the main house to check. That evening, I lit a candle. A quiet act. A way of creating presence in a space that felt borrowed. I opened one of the unopened boxes, china wrapped in tissue, each piece nestled carefully. I ran my finger along the rim of a cup. There were faint cracks in the glaze. Cracks like the ones I felt inside me, not broken, just thinned in places where the light used to shine through. I placed the cup back and closed the box. Some things were not ready to be seen again. Out the window, the grass was green and trimmed. The sky stretched open above the roofline of the house next door. Everything looked still. But something had begun to shift. Not around me. Within. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. The change was slow, the kind that arrives with no sound. It began with details so small they almost asked to be forgiven. A missed knock. A meal not mentioned. A hallway passed in silence. I told myself I was imagining things. That people grow busy, that family life is loud and full of motion, and that mine had simply gone quiet. The studio was still mine, after all. I kept it as I liked, tidy, soft-lit, anchored by the books that had followed me through 5 decades of change. But my role had begun to fade. Not abruptly. Not cruelly. Just steadily. Like a photograph losing color in the sun. The door that once seemed like a bridge between spaces became something more like a lid. A cover. A boundary wrapped in drywall. I heard them often, my family. My son's footsteps, heavier now than I remembered. The child's running commentary about cartoons and cereal. The creak of cabinet doors, the muffled laugh of his wife on the phone. These sounds used to comfort me. Now they only confirmed my distance. There was a time I would have knocked. I would have walked in with something warm in my hands and a question on my lips. Not because I was lonely, but because I believed myself still part of them. But I had come to understand the choreography. The rituals that didn't include me. The closed door wasn't just a mistake. It was the norm. There were moments I tested it, stepping outside, taking the long way around the garden just in case someone might look up, wave, say something like "come in." But they didn't. Matthew used to lean his head against my shoulder when he was tired. He once cried into my cardigan when a girl in school didn't call back. Now he didn't even glance through the window. He moved through his world like I was made of vapor. I remembered his first scraped knee, the way he screamed like the world had ended, and how I wrapped him up and kissed the blood away. I remembered late nights with fevers, cold washcloths, his damp hand wrapped around my fingers. How strange, I thought, that care is so quickly rewritten by time. That a mother's hands can become invisible. One evening, I saw through the curtains a gathering around their dining table. A birthday, perhaps. Or just a Friday. I watched the glow of candles, the lean of bodies toward one another, the soft blur of celebration. No one had told me. I sat back in my chair and folded the blanket across my lap. Not in anger. Not even in hurt. But something deeper. The silent awareness that I had been replaced. Not with cruelty. But with convenience. There are thresholds we cross without knowing. And sometimes, you only notice once the door has closed behind you. And sometimes, that door isn't closed with force. It simply never opened again. By late October, the wind had changed. It came low, and moved through the trees with that dry, papery sound that always reminded me of my childhood walks home from school. I had started wearing an old shawl indoors, not for warmth exactly, but for the memory of being held. Its thread still carried the scent of cedar from the closet in the old house. Richard used to tug it gently around my shoulders when I fell asleep on the couch. The studio had settled into its stillness. Each object had found its place. And I had found mine, too, quiet, peripheral, watchful. But something inside me was shifting. I wasn't numb. I wasn't broken. I was simply beginning to understand that silence, when left unshared, becomes something harder. I rarely saw anyone now. They moved through the house like light through water, visible, untouchable. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse from the window, her carrying groceries, or the child darting across the lawn. But our paths didn't cross. Not really. She had a way of turning away at just the moment our eyes might meet. As if she sensed my gaze and refused to hold it. I tried not to take it personally, but there were days I did. Days when I would prepare a second cup of tea out of habit, then pour it out untouched an hour later. Days when I'd arrange books with no intent to read them, just to fill the air with the sound of my own movements. Then one afternoon, I heard a child crying. It was not unusual, but this time the sound stretched longer. Uneasy. A sob that rose, paused, then rose again. I waited. 5 minutes, maybe more. Still the crying. I stepped outside. The sky was the color of cold metal. The air sharp, tasting faintly of wood smoke and earth. She stood near the back entrance, scrolling on her phone. The child was curled on the ground beside her, his face red and wet, his breath caught between hiccups. I stopped at the edge of the patio, just far enough not to intrude. I waited. Not with expectation, but with presence. She looked up, met my eyes, and then looked away. She said nothing. Not with words, but with the hard line of her shoulders. And I understood. I was not meant to cross that space. I went back inside. Slowly. Quietly. My feet felt too loud on the path. I boiled water, though I wasn't thirsty. Rearranged the drawer of tea towels. Sat down. Stood up. Sat again. There had been a time, years of them, when a child's cry had summoned me with the force of instinct. But instincts, like voices, grow quiet when they are not answered. That night I turned off all the lights early. Not from exhaustion, but because I couldn't find a good enough reason to keep them on. In the dark, I could still hear the house. But I no longer reached toward it. And I began to wonder, when did care become interference? And when did I become extra? I wasn't invisible. Not entirely. I was something worse, optional. By November, I had stopped hoping for interruption. There was a stillness to my days now that no longer felt like rest. It was a waiting without purpose, a silence that had passed beyond peace into something thinner, more brittle. I filled hours with tasks so minor they dissolved as I did them, wiping down already clean counters, refolding the same linen napkins. The patterns kept me upright. The routines held me. Tea at 7. A short walk at 10. Letters written but never sent. Meals that returned to the same plate, the same spoon, the same place by the window. One morning, I reached for the inside door, the one that once led directly to the hallway of the main house. I didn't expect it to open. I hadn't tried it in weeks. But something in the air that day made me check. Cold, expectant. The way the air used to feel just before a snow. The knob didn't turn. At first I thought it was stuck. I pressed lightly. Then firmly. Still nothing. I stepped back and looked more closely. The lock had been changed. It was small. Polished. New. No one had mentioned it. No one had asked if I'd be comfortable with it. But someone had made the decision. And followed through. I stood there for a long time. Not angry. Not even surprised. Just hollow. There was no note. No explanation. Only the quiet fact of it, I was now officially outside. Not just in location, but in trust. I looked down at my hands. They looked like my mother's now. Veined. Careworn. Capable of so much, yet called upon for nothing. Once those hands had buttoned small coats, bandaged knees, stirred soup for fevers, folded shirts warm from the line. And now? They closed slowly around the doorknob once more, then let go. That evening, I took out a box I hadn't touched since the move. Inside were photo albums, pages thick with plastic and memory. I ran my hand across the cover. Opened it. Stopped at a picture of Matthew at age 7, holding a kite that refused to fly. In the photo, he's looking at me. Expectant. Certain that I can make the wind behave. I closed the album. Placed it back in the box. And understood, without bitterness, that I no longer held that kind of power in his world. Some doors stay locked. Others are never meant to be opened again. And some are closed so quietly, you only realize it when you reach for the handle and feel nothing waiting for you on the other side. There was no decision. No line drawn. Just a shift. One evening, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched since the move. It held the things I wasn't ready to place, things without a category, an old church bulletin with Richard's name circled, a button from my coat long lost, a photograph of Matthew holding a sparkler on a summer night. His face had been round then, so open, so easily joyful. He had called me to come outside that evening, eager to show the light in his hand. That was the kind of boy he was, always wanting to share, to pull me into the moment. I didn't take anything out. Just looked. The next day, I cleared a shelf. wiped it down slowly, though there was hardly any dust. I began folding linens differently, placing books back into boxes, one at a time. No labels. No lists. Just the quiet act of undoing. No one noticed. I wondered how many days I could disappear in plain sight before anyone would ask. The thought didn't hurt. It settled. It was not sadness anymore, it was sediment. I found a stack of envelopes in the drawer with the blue ribbon. The kind I used to keep for letters that mattered. I took one, sat down at the table, and began to write. Not to them. Not to anyone, really. More to the life I had tried to build inside those four white walls. The note wasn't long. Just a page. I didn't say I was leaving. I didn't explain anything. There's a kind of truth that doesn't belong in words. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in the envelope. Wrote nothing on the front. I set it on the small table near the front door. And then I waited. Not for a knock. Not for footsteps. I waited for the moment inside me to settle enough that I could stand up again. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay still, eyes open, watching the shadows shift along the ceiling like water. I didn't feel fear. But I did feel the shape of something final, moving beneath the surface. It was not yet an ending. But it was no longer a beginning. It was the still place before a choice finds legs. It was still dark when I rose. Not night, not morning. That thin hour in between, when the world seems unsure whether to hold its breath or exhale. I made tea. Not to drink, but for the sound, the soft click of the kettle, the steam against the porcelain. A sound to keep me company in the last moments of waiting. The suitcase was by the door. Small. It didn't take much to leave. I hadn't filled it with things I needed. Only things I chose. My shawl. Richard's watch. One book. A photograph. The letter still sat untouched on the side table. The studio felt different. Not emptier, quieter in a way that was deliberate. Like a room that had exhaled, ready to be left alone. I stood for a long while at the window. The lights in the main house were still off. It looked peaceful, in the way houses do when no one inside is aware of what has already passed. I watched that quiet structure, the one where my son was likely still asleep, curled beside the woman who had never truly wanted me close. I wasn't bitter. But I did wonder if he would ever notice the absence. Not just of my body, but of the history I carried. The memories that had built his childhood, brick by brick. The kind of remembering only a mother can hold. I had given everything I knew how to give. And yet, somehow, I had become a guest with no name. I wondered if he'd tell the child stories of me. Or if I would vanish into vague phrases. She was quiet. Liked books. Lived in the back. I hoped not. But I no longer needed the answer. I stepped out into the morning. The cold met me like an equal, sharp, honest. The gravel crunched beneath my feet. I closed the gate gently behind me. I didn't leave bitterness. Or accusation. Only silence, carefully placed, like a folded napkin at the end of a meal. At the end of the drive, I turned once, just once, and looked back. Not to reconsider. To remember. Then I walked on. And with every step, I felt it, an unfastening. Grief did not lift. But something else did. A weight I hadn't known was pressing down on me, slowly rising from my shoulders. And in its place, a strange thing grew. Relief. I was not walking away from love. I was walking back toward myself. And for the first time in a long while, I could feel the ground beneath me holding me up, not as an obligation, but as a return.